Hey guys, this is chapter 9 review very quickly. I'm going to try to keep it kind of short. Alright, so we're going to start out with Korea. So, Korea, the page numbers that I want you to focus on are 391 and 392. Now, because of Korea's close proximity to China, it's just natural that we're going to see some interaction and some influences that happen there. And of course, China is the bigger state or the bigger nation, so it's definitely we're going to see where they dominate this interaction. Korea is going to adopt many aspects of the Chinese culture. However, they're going to also retain some autonomy about themselves. They're going to also retain some very distinctive culture and definitely their political autonomy. Korea is also, just like Japan, they're going to send scholars to China to study Chinese culture and philosophy so that they can learn kind of the Chinese way. All right, so let's go on to Vietnam. Now, Vietnam, the page numbers for Vietnam are 382. So when China, meaning the Tang Dynasty, they are going to they're going to adapt this Chinese strain of rice that's actually, it's this very fast ripening strain of rice that's going to be better for them, and this is going to allow this rice is going to allow their population to increase. Make sure that you read on page 382 to figure out what that effect, what this population increase is going to have, that effect. Again, page 382. Now, let's go on down to Japan. Japan, just as Korea, remember Japan is also going to send scholars to China to learn about Chinese philosophy and culture. This can be found on page 394. And I want you to keep in mind that the Japanese, they assimilated Chinese culture, but it was voluntary. Whereas Korea and Vietnam, there had been military pressure, if you will, but we didn't see that. But make sure that you read on pages 390 and 397 about those aspects of Korea and Vietnam and how they were different from Japan in regards to the assimilation of Chinese culture. Okay, so now over at China, foot binding. Now we've spent a little bit of time, I would say a significant amount of time on foot binding. So I need you to know which dynasty this was, and as well as what foot binding would suggest about Chinese women's life. And you can find that on page 384. All right, so we're going to go down to the tribute system, which again, we did an activity in class on the tribute system. So, and this is going to be on pages 387 through 389. So the Xiongnu, the Uyghurs, the Khitans, and the Geritans, they all required China to send them valuable gifts in return, and they would not attack them. This reminded me of a movie, think like The Bug's Life. So remember, this is quite different than what the original system was set up. The original system was to where people would bring stuff to Chinese court, they would present themselves, and they would, we want to trade with you. And China in return, to show their grandioso, their magnificent culture and wealth, they would give them back gifts that were most of the time more, worth more than what they had been given, and then they would also bestow upon them, titles and robes, and they would allow them to trade with them. But with these people to the north, the Xiongnu, the Uyghurs, the Khitans, and the Geritans, this was backwards. This was flipped on them, okay? This is where China has to give them stuff so that they would not constantly be at war or be attacking them. So remember, this is on 387 through 389. Not only that, but we did work here in class on that. Now, at the bottom of page 387, make sure that you understand that oftentimes foreign ambassadors would receive goods that were way more valuable, as I had said a second ago, than what they had given. And again, this was just to show, China did this to show their superiority, to show that they are, that this was, what we do. It's just it's the Chinese way. No foreign country. All right, so and all of this was done so that this foreign country that had came to court would just be able to trade. And so all of this is all about money. It's all about the money. It's going to be very lucrative for those foreign countries that want to come and trade, because China has so many people, and then they need so many goods, and so this is going to be a very lucrative thing. Make sure you read, hint, hint, cough, cough, wink, wink. Make sure that you read at the bottom of page 387, that very last paragraph. Couple things in there that you're going to see, okay? Page 382, we're going to now go to China's golden age. China begins to set the bar, if you will, for inventions and discoveries. Their attention to the arts and to literature are just flourishing. They're setting the tone for the rest of the world. Now remember, there's no email or internet to where this can all be shared very quickly. So this is happening at a much slower pace than what we would see now. If someone created something in China, we would be able to see it almost instantly. But this is not the case during that time. So that's, again, page 382. You need to make sure that you know about China's golden age. On page 398, it specifically talks about one of these. And this is about how China had created gunpowder. But this gunpowder is actually what has equated for the Europeans to create the cannon, which then continues on to become, the foundation for wars that are going to be fought. That's again on page 398. It's a talk where it talks about the interaction between China and Eurasia. If you go to page 397, this talks about the printing press, which was also spread from China to Eurasia. And later on, and there's a little bit of controversy about this, later on we know that the printing press was either rediscovered or redesigned, however you want to look at it. I'm not a historian that would be making those decisions, and that's done by Johann Gutenberg. But the important thing about this is when the printing was in China, and obviously it was at a much earlier date than what we know from Johann Gutenberg's invention, we know that Buddhism was linked to this invention of printing. And that's like I said, on page 397. Make sure you know about China's canal and waterways that were created and the economic impact that it had on China. This is on page 382. Repeating, make sure that you know about about China's canal and waterway system and how it impacted the economy. And this again is on page 382. Make sure that you know about the interaction between China and the nomadic pastoral peoples of the northern steppes, as well as the northern nomads. This can be the northern nomad information can be found on 389, and those nomadic pastoral people can be found on page 386. Let's see. Oh, make sure that you know about the writing systems for Korea, which is found in the writing system for Korea, which is found on page 392. Make sure that you know about Japan's writing system, which is found on page 396, and about Vietnam's writing system, which is found, oh my God, I can't talk, which is found on page 394. So let's quickly go to Buddhism. We have three things. I think I'm going to make it under my 15 minutes. All right, so for Buddhism, in regards to remember how we talked about how when it gets to an area, how they had kind of rejected it, but then they kind of took it in and they kind of made it their own, okay? So this is on page 401. And know that when Buddhism becomes modified, it kind of takes on to the regional theme, if you will, or the regional feel. So an example of this we found on page 401, which is what we were doing today in class when we were creating the timelines. So know that, for instance, it said in the book how morality was one of the words, but when it was translated and done with the Confucian spin on it, it was fial, submission, and obedience. Okay. On page 403, make sure you know about the xenophobic reaction regarding Buddhism and what happened, specifically like with what the monasteries and what happened with those. And again, that's on page 403. And the last item is on page 399. I need you to know about how Buddhism allowed the Eastern Asian region to have kind of this common culture, this culture commonality that was allowed. So this was a brief review. I did it under 15 minutes. Look at me. We're at like 11 minutes. Make sure that you're reading. Make sure you're replaying this and getting those page numbers down and going over those page numbers. For my class specifically, I will be taking your Cornell notes tomorrow. I will be checking a couple back chapters and then, of course, chapter 9. If you have any questions, you can email me, and good luck. Study. Bye.